Crossing the void between ships was like swimming through liquid darkness. The Never Dawn's hull seemed to devour their suit lights, absorbing the beams rather than reflecting them. Even the normal starlight from the cloud appeared dimmer here, as if something was consuming the illumination itself. "Check your tethers," Reese's voice came through the comms, partially masked by the ever-present singing. The strange melody had grown stronger since they'd left the second chance, its rhythm matching nothing in human music. "Tethers secure," Al confirmed. Then, did anyone else's lights just flicker? They had. All three suit lights dimmed for a fraction of a second, though their power readings showed no change. The darkness felt almost alive in that moment, pressing against their faceplates like a curious animal. The singing shifted, becoming clearer yet somehow more alien. Through their comms, they could almost make out words now, though each burst of near comprehension slipped away like water. "Energy readings are," Rhonda's voice cut out mid-sentence, replaced by a burst of that singing before returning. "Nothing I've ever seen before. The patterns suggest technological origin, but the complexity is beyond anything in our database." They reached the Never Dawn's open airlock, its maw of absolute darkness waiting before them. Their suits' external thermometers registered temperatures far below what should be possible in space, yet the metal showed no signs of the structural stress such cold should cause. "Movement," Al reported suddenly. Inside the airlock. Something, but when they all looked, nothing was there. Just that consuming darkness waiting. Reese led them in, their magnetic boots engaging with the airlock floor. The inner door stood open as well, the ship's interior beyond it visible only as varying shades of black. "I'm picking up atmospheric pressure," Rhonda said, her voice now competing with multiple layers of that singing. "Composition is normal. That can't be right. Nothing about these temperatures should allow, must understand the nature of." A different voice cut through their comms before dissolving back into song. "What was that?" Al's hand had moved to his suit's weapon mount. "Unknown transmission," Rhonda replied. "But it wasn't broadcast on any frequency we can detect. It's like it was injected directly into our comms," Reese finished. They'd all heard it, but as he looked at their faces through their faceplates, he realized something else. "What did you hear it say?" "Something about understanding nature," Al said. "It said the process requires careful observation," Rhonda corrected. Reese felt a chill that had nothing to do with the impossible cold. He'd heard the subject show promising adaptation. Their lights finally found purchase on something, geometric patterns etched into the airlock walls. The design seemed to shift when viewed directly, as if the metal itself was flowing into new configurations. "Those patterns," Rhonda moved closer, her suit's sensors extended. "They're not random. There's mathematical precision here, but it's not like any equations I've seen." The complexity suggests, her voice cut out again, replaced by multiple layers of singing. When it returned, she was silent for a moment before speaking again. "Did anyone else hear what I was saying just now?" "You cut out," Al confirmed, "the singing." "I didn't stop talking." Her voice was tight with controlled fear. "I felt myself speaking, but you're saying nothing came through." Reese studied the patterns on the wall, noticing how they seemed to extend down the corridor beyond, becoming more complex as they went. The designs reminded him of circuit boards, but wrong somehow, too organic, too fluid. "Full sensor record," he ordered. "But we proceed inside. Whatever happened to the Never Dawn's crew, our answers are in there." They moved forward, the singing in their comms growing stronger with each step. The patterns on the walls became more elaborate, and now they could see similar designs on the floor and ceiling. It was as if the entire ship was being slowly rewritten in this alien geometry. "The hull composition is changing," Rhonda reported, then immediately asked, "Did that transmit?" "It came through," Al confirmed. "But I heard something else under it." A voice saying we'd make excellent additions to the ongoing work. Reese turned to face his team, their suit lights creating overlapping pools of illumination in the consuming darkness. "We stay together. No matter what we hear on comms, we maintain visual contact. If something doesn't match what we see with our own eyes, we don't trust it." The others nodded, but before anyone could speak, the singing surged through their comms again. This time, for just a moment, it resolved into perfect clarity. Each of them heard their own name being called in their own voice, asking for help from somewhere deep within the transformed ship. None of them mentioned this to the others as they pressed forward. None of them had to. The fear in their eyes said they all understood. Whatever had happened to the Never Dawn was already reaching out to them, already trying to draw them in. Behind them, unnoticed, the patterns on the walls shifted again, the alien geometry flowing like liquid metal into new configurations. The changes followed their path, as if the ship itself was learning from their presence, adapting to their intrusion, or preparing for it. The crew quarters should have been empty, should have been dark, should have been cold. They were none of these things. Personal effects lay arranged in precise geometric patterns that mimicked the designs on the walls. A collection of family photos formed a perfect spiral on one desk. Clothing had been laid out in fractals. Even scattered datapads had been positioned to form complex mathematical relationships with their surroundings. This wasn't done by human hands, Al said through the comms, his voice nearly lost under layers of that endless singing. Require immediate assistance in the engine room, a voice that sounded exactly like Reese cut through their channels. Ignore it, the real Reese commanded. I'm right here, and I didn't say that. They moved deeper into the quarters, their lights revealing more evidence of methodical rearrangement. Every personal item had been studied, categorized, and positioned with inhuman precision. Look at this, Rhonda called out, then frowned. Did that transmit? We heard you, Al confirmed. But also heard you asking for help from the medical bay right after. She pointed to one wall where the flowing geometric patterns had incorporated what looked like military hand signals. Al moved closer, studying the designs. Those are Terran Marine emergency codes, he said. But they're wrong. Altered. Like something learned them but didn't quite understand. The singing surged again, drowning out his next words. Through their comms came a burst of overlapping voices, some human, some decidedly not. Fragments of conversations merged with mathematical sequences and what might have been machine code. Subjects showing remarkable adaptation to. Came Rhonda's voice, though she hadn't spoken. Procedure requires careful monitoring of, in Al's tone, but not from Al. Neural patterns successfully mapped for, using Reese's voice. Everyone freeze, Reese ordered. Don't move. They stood still as statues while a new sound emerged beneath the singing. The subtle whir of machinery behind the walls, following patterns that matched the geometric designs. Reese. Al's voice came through the comms. We should check the cargo hold. I think I saw that wasn't me, Al said immediately, pointing to himself and shaking his head violently. The singing grew louder, and now they could hear messages layered within it. Instructions, commands, contradictory directions, all in their own voices, all trying to split them up. Everyone, comms off, Reese ordered. Now, they deactivated their communication systems one by one. The silence that followed felt almost holy after the cacophony of false voices and alien singing. Reese pulled a physical notepad and pen from his suit's utility pocket, old-fashioned emergency backup gear that now seemed like their best option. He wrote quickly and held it up. Can't trust any tech. Hand signals notes only. Al nodded, then froze. Behind Reese's shoulder, through a viewport that shouldn't exist on an interior wall, something moved. Something that watched them with familiar eyes. He pulled out his own notepad, observation ports in walls. Being studied. Rhonda was already writing, ship structure changing, growing new components. They stood in a triangle, backs to each other, comparing notes while their lights revealed more impossible changes to the crew quarters. The geometric patterns had begun incorporating their own hand signals, now learning, adapting, trying to find new ways to communicate with, or manipulate, them. A slight movement caught Reese's attention. One of the data pads in the fractal arrangement had lit up, displaying a message in standard text, "Why do you resist optimization?" The pad went dark before he could show the others. But when he looked down at the deck, he saw his own handwriting from the notepad being reproduced in flowing metal, the ship itself learning to mimic even this analog form of communication. He quickly wrote a new note, "Keep moving. Find crew. Don't split UP." They proceeded deeper into the ship, their lights revealing more transformed spaces, more observation ports, more evidence of methodical study and recreation. Behind them, the geometric patterns continued to shift and flow, incorporating everything they did into its endless calculations. Their bootsteps echoed in the impossible silence of their disabled comms, but none of them believed for a moment that they weren't being heard, studied, analyzed. Through a viewport that shouldn't exist, in a wall that had been solid metal moments before, another pair of eyes watched them pass. The eyes belonged to French Biggs's brother, or what had once been him, and they held the same methodical interest as all the other observations posts they'd passed. None of them saw him smile. None of them needed to. They could feel the expression anyway, radiating through the transformed ship like another verse in that endless, haunting song. The feeling of being watched had become a physical sensation, like a pressure against their suits. Every viewport that shouldn't exist, every observation port that had grown from solid metal, every reflective surface held eyes, sometimes human, sometimes not. Reese led them deeper into the ship, following what should have been a straight path to the bridge. Instead, the corridor curved in ways that defied the Never Dawn's original layout. Walls had shifted, doorways appeared where none should be, and always those geometric patterns flowed like liquid mathematics across every surface. Al held up his notepad. Wrong dimensions, ship IS bigger inside. They all knew it was true. They'd been walking for too long, covered too much distance. The Never Dawn had been a medium-sized exploration vessel. They should have reached the bridge minutes ago. Rhonda's notepad, laboratory ahead. Not on original plans. The space that had once been the ship's mess hall had been transformed. Ancient-looking machinery lined the walls, humming with power, despite the ship's supposedly dead systems. The devices seemed to merge with the hull's geometric patterns, as if they'd grown naturally from the metal itself. More disturbing were the examination tables. 3 of them, arranged in a perfect triangle, each sized for a human body. The walls here had more observation ports than anywhere else. Eyes watched from every angle, human, alien, mechanical, all studying them with the same clinical interest. Reese wrote quickly sensor readings. Rhonda checked her suit's instruments, then wrote impossible biomass signatures, preserved but still metabolizing. Something moved in the shadows beyond the examination tables. They swung their lights toward it, revealing more machinery emerging from the walls like metal vines. The devices seemed to pulse with internal energy, their surfaces covered in those same flowing patterns. Al's hand was on his weapon as he wrote, growing, watching IT happen. He was right. The machinery was slowly extending, reaching out into the room with deliberate purpose. The geometric patterns flowed faster here, more complex, like an alien language approaching mathematical infinity. A viewport formed in the wall nearest Reese. Through it, he saw French Biggs's brother watching him. The man's eyes were clear, aware, but held something else now, an analytical coldness that reminded Reese of the way scientists observe test subjects. French's brother smiled, raised his hand, and wrote in the air with a finger. The geometric patterns on their side of the wall flowed into the same words. The optimization proceeds as planned. Rhonda tapped Reese's shoulder urgently, holding up her notepad. Biological samples in machinery, human and other. They turned their lights to where she pointed. Inside transparent sections of the growing machines, preserved tissue samples floated in unknown liquids. Some were recognizably human. Others belonged to species none of them had ever seen. Elle wrote rapidly, ship IS becoming a lab. Or already was one. A new viewport formed, showing them a corridor they'd passed through earlier. The geometric patterns there had changed, incorporating every mark they'd made, every boot print, every touch surface. The ship wasn't just observing them, it was learning from them, adapting its own structure based on their presence. Reese held up his notepad, need to find bridge. Answers there. But even as the others nodded, they all sensed the truth. The bridge might not exist anymore, at least not as they understood it. The Never Dawn was becoming something else, its transformation guided by ancient machines and whatever intelligence drove them. Through the newest viewport, French's brother watched them realize this. His smile never changed as he raised another finger to write in the air. The patterns flowed into new words, your confusion is expected. Early subjects often resist understanding. More machinery emerged from the walls, pulsing with that same internal energy. The examination tables seemed to shimmer, their surfaces flowing into new configurations like everything else in this impossible space. Rhonda's notepad shook slightly as she wrote, we're not first ones here, we're latest ones here. Al added latest tests to subjects. The geometric patterns around them flowed faster, more complex, incorporating their every movement into their endless calculations. Through every viewport, through every observation port, through every reflective surface, eyes watched them come to understand their situation. The ship had become a laboratory. Or perhaps it always had been, hidden beneath the familiar surfaces of the Never Dawn, waiting for new subjects to arrive. Reese wrote one last note, keep moving. Don't touch anything. But even as they turned to leave, they all knew it was too late. They'd been touching things since they arrived. Every surface, every air current, every radiation signature from their suits had been analyzed, categorized, and added to the endless flow of data in those geometric patterns. The experiment had already begun. They just didn't know what kind yet. Behind them, French's brother watched through his viewport, his smile unchanging as new machinery continued to grow from the transformed walls of his ship. The patterns flowed into one final message: optimization cannot be escaped. None of them saw it form. None of them had to. They could feel the truth of it in the weight of all those watching eyes, in the hum of ancient machines, in the slow transformation of everything around them into something that served a purpose they were only beginning to understand. And still those geometric patterns flowed, incorporating every moment of their growing comprehension into their infinite calculations. They found the data core where the bridge should have been. The room had transformed like everything else, but here the changes felt more complete, more purposeful. The geometric patterns didn't just flow across the surfaces, they emerged from them, creating three-dimensional structures that pulsed with information. Rhonda held up her notepad. Patterns are language, mathematical and scientific. She pointed to a sequence that rippled through the air like a physical thing. The symbols within it shifted between mathematical equations and what looked like DNA sequences, then into something far more complex. Al wrote quickly, room changing shape, following US. He was right. The space itself seemed to flow around them, walls and ceiling adjusting to keep them centered in what felt like an observation chamber. Every movement they made was reflected in the patterns, analyzed, incorporated into new configurations. A holographic display sparked to life in the center of the room, or perhaps it was another viewport, another window into somewhere else. It showed them the never dawn as it had been, then its gradual transformation. The changes hadn't started when they arrived. They'd begun long before, when the ship first entered the quiet. Reese's notepad, ship was infected, converted. Rhonda studied the display, then wrote, not infection, optimization. Their word choice matters. The hologram shifted to show other ships, other transformations. Dozens of them, each following the same pattern. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full of these change vessels, each one converted into something that served the ancient machinery's purpose. Al tapped his notepad urgently. Military implications. These are research stations. As if responding to his observation, the patterns around them flowed into new configurations. Data streamed through the three-dimensional geometries, showing experiments, modifications, careful studies of various species. The clinical precision of it all somehow made it worse. Rhonda's hand shook as she wrote, not just research, improvement program. Through a newly formed viewport, French's brother watched them piece it together. His smile remained fixed as he raised his hand again. The patterns flowed into words. Optimization requires understanding. Understanding requires observation. Observation requires subjects. More displays came to life around them, showing other chambers on other converted ships. Each one held different experiments, different subjects, different stages of what the patterns kept calling optimization. Reese wrote rapidly, need to leave. Naobu. But even as he held up the note, they all felt it, the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, the way the patterns began flowing faster, more purposefully. The ancient machinery wasn't just showing them these things. It was gauging their reactions, measuring their understanding. Al's notepad, not random victims. Selected. The patterns confirmed his insight, flowing into new configurations that showed how ships were chosen, how crews were assessed, how subjects were categorized for different types of optimization. A new hologram appeared, showing their own approach to the never dawn. They watched themselves through the ancient machinery's eyes, saw how it had evaluated them, measured them, judged their potential for whatever purpose it served. Rhonda wrote, we're being prepped for processing. The geometric patterns rippled in what might have been approval. Through every viewport, through every observation port, eyes watched their growing comprehension. Some of those eyes belonged to French's brother. Some belonged to other crew members from other ships. All held that same clinical interest, that same analytical coldness. Through the largest viewport, French's brother began to write in the air again. But this time, his movements were jerky, resistant, as if part of him was fighting against what he'd become. The patterns took longer to form his message, still aware, trapped, but improved. For just a moment, the coldness in his eyes cracked, showing terror beneath. Then the clinical mask slammed back into place, and his hand moved smoothly again. Optimization cannot be resisted, only embraced. The room shifted again, herding them toward what had once been the bridge's main console. The ancient machinery there had grown more complex, more complete in its transformation. It hummed with power and purpose, ready to begin whatever process had changed the others. Reese held up one last note: run. But as they turned to flee, the geometric patterns around them flowed into a final message, one that seemed to come from every surface at once. Too late. Observation phase complete. Optimization begins. The humming grew louder, and through every viewport, through every observation port, through every reflective surface, they saw themselves being watched not just by the transformed crews of other ships, but by something older, something that had created this machinery ages ago, something that had been waiting for new subjects for a very, very long time. The engine room wasn't an engine room anymore. The vast chamber had become a cathedral to ancient science, its walls alive with flowing patterns and humming machinery that reached like metallic vines through every surface. The Never Dawn's original power core had been transformed into something else, something that pulsed with energies their sensors couldn't comprehend. Al wrote frantically, "Whole ship is machine now aoi living tech." Living was the right word. Every surface rippled with purpose, every pattern shifted with intelligent design. The geometric symbols here were more complex than anywhere else, telling stories of transformation and improvement in their mathematical language. Through a massive viewport that spanned one entire wall, they could see other ships, dozens of them, all in different stages of transformation. The quiet wasn't empty space at all. It was a vast laboratory complex, hidden from normal sensors by technology they were only beginning to understand. Rhonda's notepad shook as she wrote, "Core readings impossible, converting matter energy." The machinery around them pulsed in response to her observation. New viewports formed, showing them more chambers like this one on other ships. In each one, they saw subjects in different stages of what the patterns called optimization. Some were human. Some were alien species they recognized. Others were things they had no context for at all. Reese held up his notepad where IS Never Dawn's crew. As if in answer, a section of the transformed engine room shifted, walls flowing like liquid metal to reveal a new chamber. Inside, suspended in fields of energy that defied physics, floated the crew of the Never Dawn. Their bodies were being systematically altered, enhanced with technology that seemed to grow from within rather than being attached externally. French's brother was among them, but his transformation was complete. His viewport now showed him clearly, a perfect fusion of human and ancient machine, his flesh incorporated into the geometric patterns that flowed through everything here. His hand moved, and the patterns formed words. The process is necessary. Species require improvement. More displays activated around them, showing the history of this place. They saw ancient aliens, long dead, creating the first versions of these machines. They saw the development of the technology, the early experiments, the gradual automation of the entire process. And they saw its purpose, the drive to perfect living beings, to optimize them beyond their natural limitations. Al's notepad, ITS, a weapon program. But Rhonda was already writing no, survival program that became weapon. The patterns rippled in confirmation. The machinery showed them more. The ancient aliens' desperate search for immortality, their accidental creation of something else in the process, their eventual realization that they could use their mistakes as weapons. Through every viewport, eyes watched them understand. Human eyes, alien eyes, hybrid eyes, all filled with that same clinical interest, all belonging to beings that had been optimized by these ancient machines. The humming grew stronger. The geometric patterns began flowing faster, more purposefully. The machinery around them shifted, preparing for new subjects. Reese wrote quickly, "Back to airlock." And no wow. They turned to run, but the ship had other plans. Walls flowed like water, cutting off their retreat. The patterns around them became more complex, more insistent. Through the viewports, through the observation ports, through every reflecting surface, the optimized beings watched with perfect, clinical patience. French's brother's viewport grew larger, dominating one wall. His smile never changed as his hand moved through the air one final time. The patterns flowed into his last message: optimization is not a choice. ITI is an inevitability. The process has already begun. They felt it then. Subtle changes in the air pressure in their suits, minute vibrations in their boots where they touched the deck. The ancient machinery had been analyzing them since they arrived, preparing for this moment. Rhonda held up her notepad with trembling hands. "We're being scanned at cellular level." The transformed engine room hummed with power and purpose. Energy fields similar to those holding the Never Dawn's crew began to form around them. Through every viewport, the optimized beings watched with scientific interest, ready to observe the process they had all experienced. Reese's notepad flashed in the strange light run. They bolted for the nearest corridor, energy fields trying to coalesce around them. But something strange happened. The fields couldn't fully form. They slipped through like smoke, dissipating wherever the team resisted their pull. Rode as they ran, not working on US. Why? The geometric patterns around them flowed with what almost seemed like frustration. Through a viewport, French's brother's expression had changed, showing genuine surprise for the first time. They reached a junction, and Rhonda scribbled quickly. Patterns different here. Machine IS struggling. The walls rippled, trying to redirect them, but their resistance seemed to interfere with the ship's ability to transform fully. Through various viewports, they could see other optimized beings watching with growing interest. This was something new, something unexpected. French's brother's viewport followed them, and now his hand moved with urgent purpose. The patterns formed his message, understanding achieved. Optimization requires acceptance. Unwilling subjects cannot be improved. The machinery around them pulsed, and new patterns formed everywhere. Survival requires willing transformation. Resistance ensures termination. Choice is fundamental to optimization. They reached another junction, and Reese pointed toward what felt like the direction of their airlock. As they ran, the patterns kept flowing with new messages. Those WHO choose improvement survive. Those WHO resist perish. This is the basis of evolution. The ship's attempts to stop them grew weaker the more they actively resisted. The ancient machinery seemed bound by protocols they were only beginning to understand. Through the viewports, the optimized beings watched them with new interest. They had discovered something important, a fundamental rule of the process that perhaps even the original architects had built into their creation. French's brother appeared one last time, and for a moment his expression was entirely human again. The patterns formed his final message. I chose this. We all did. Survival, at any cost. They could see their airlock ahead now. Behind them, the ship's transformations were already beginning to revert wherever they had passed, as if their resistance had disrupted the optimization process itself. The geometric patterns flowed into one last message as they reached the airlock. You will return. When survival becomes paramount, all choose improvement. They cycled through the airlock and burst into space, pushing hard for the second chance. Behind them, through every viewport of the transformed Never Dawn, countless optimized beings watched them escape with perfect, clinical interest. They had come looking for answers about missing ships and crews. Instead, they had found something far older, far more purposeful, an automated system still following its creator's last commands, still seeking to perfect every living thing it encountered. But now they knew its secret. The quiet could only take those who surrendered to it, those who chose optimization over death. The real question was, what could make someone willing to make that choice? Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave it a like and to subscribe if you'd like to see more. Feel free to comment and share it as well. With all that said, go on and check out the video in the top left. I think you might like it.